afternoon, everyone. It's 1 minute past 12, so it is afternoon. Apologies, it looks like I've got a Christmas tree growing out the top of my head at the minute. Lovely to see you all on today's call. I am accompanied by my colleague who's going to watch for people coming in. We are recording today's session, so you might want to leave your camera off. My colleague's just telling me that he can't actually hear me, but that might be something to do with. Can everybody else hear me? If you can just let me know if you can hear.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. That's super. Thank you, Stephen. Okay, fantastic. So, as I was just going to say, that's thrown me a little bit now. I'm going to share my slides. Yes, I was saying we're recording today's session, so you might want to leave your cameras off. Feel free to put any questions that you have in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll hopefully leave plenty of time at the end to get round to those. I will try. I'm notoriously bad at keeping to time, but I will do my level best. I think the overriding message that I want to get across today is this regulation is very much, or the regulation to which digital product passports belong, is very much in its. If everybody can keep themselves on mute, that would be amazing. Thank you. What was I going to say? Oh yeah, the regulation to which digital product passports belong is very much in its infancy. So the idea of today's session is fundamentally to give you an idea of what they're going to be and what they're going to entail, and if you're not already thinking about them, to kind of guide your thinking. So I don't want to be alarmist, I don't want to panic any of you. There is time to prepare, but we wanted to kind of help you get ahead of the curve so you can start guiding your work, guiding your thinking, talking internally within your representative organisations, and importantly, providing a kind of touch point should you have any issues or any questions, then we're here to help. So that's fundamentally what I want to get across. I don't want anybody panicking. We've got time to prepare. This is just kind of like an introductory session. And then as we get more information from the Commission, we'll do update webinars. So you're always very much ahead of the curve in terms of what's coming down the line. So I've pulled together a very brief agenda. There's a high-level overview slide because I have been criticised by my colleagues of going straight into the detail without giving you kind of like that headline information. So I am now on with my webinars, including a high-level overview or a highlight slide. We'll look at the regulation and drivers behind digital product passports. So, you know, the EU regulation that's led us to this point, and you know, further plans beyond today. And then we'll look at what we're calling the ESPR working plans. So that very much defines which products are within scope of the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation, and therefore which ones are going to be mandated to have a digital product passport. Then we'll cover off what are the components for digital product passports. So what kind of data are those passports going to include? What do those passports look like? You know, who's going to have access to that data, and so on. We'll talk a little bit about the implementation considerations, because this is a huge job that the Commission has on its hands and the representative member states in the EU. And there are certain platforms and frameworks that need to be in place before this can run smoothly. So we'll talk about those. I'm going to do a deep dive into, and the sector that I've chosen is fashion and textiles, predominantly because that's kind of like the first to comply. And I think fashion and textiles historically hasn't got the best sustainability credentials, although we have some UK and EU and actually global companies that are making great headway in terms of circularity and sustainability. But I think that's predominantly why fashion and textiles has found itself high up in terms of those priority products. So we'll do a deep dive in terms of what do digital product passports and eco design mean for that sector. And then we'll talk a little bit about enforcement and timeline, so we know what we're dealing with in terms of when we have to have everything ready by. And then global considerations. So the EU, quite wrongly in my eyes, always gets a bit of a hard rap in terms of being at the forefront of this kind of regulation, and regulation's such a headache and it can be a barrier and so on. But actually, if you look, yes, the EU is spearheading sustainability regulation, but global markets are very quickly following suit. So I think it's important to put a positive spin on this and say, well, if you align yourself with the EU standards and their movement in this area, then look at the other markets that this opens up. And then we'll talk about, what are the practical considerations for you guys? I know we've got some of our EU colleagues on the call today. So what are the practical implications for you sitting within the block? And then what are the practical implications for GB businesses that sadly sit now outside of the block? And what are the practical implementation considerations? And then what can we do to start planning? Whilst we wait for further direction from the EU, what can we be doing internally within our organisations to prepare for this? Okay, so headline information. What are digital product passports? Well, essentially, they are a digital record that is linked to a product that contains information about its origin, its composition, its sustainability. Longer term, it will be used as part of digital customs clearance, so it will have more customs information in there as well. It is at the moment, we don't know whether the product passport will be linked to an item or a batch or a model. That will come out in time. So those of you that are using Global Trade Department for your GPSR compliance and using us as your authorised representative, then you'll know that we group products into product categories. We're kind of hoping that it won't be too much of a departure from that, so that we can help you with your digital product passports quite seamlessly. What's the purpose? Well, essentially, it's to provide that kind of transparency and traceability across EU value chains. So the EU very much wants to trace product back to source to make sure that there's no environmental or social impediments to the product being placed on the EU marketplace. So no forced labour issues, no overuse of natural resources, and so on. And the purpose is these passports will provide that traceability back to source. And also, obviously, with the rise of the sustainability conscious consumer and business customer, they want that information. They want to be able to compare products according to their sustainability credentials. So digital product passports will facilitate that view for them. It's going to apply to most products across the EU. Obviously, we've got the priority products that I'll go into with the working plan shortly, but fundamentally it will apply to, or digital product passports will eventually be part of virtually all products placed on the EU marketplace, with the exception of some that maybe already are subject to a digital component, or some of the usual, the familiar ones that sometimes sit outside of this kind of scope, like food and feed and so on. I provided just a very high level of core data that will be included here, and we'll do a deep dive into that shortly. And then obviously benefits, there are benefits. It's very much about that traceability and that transparency. And obviously this ties in with the overall waste directive. So the EU is very much looking at how can it reduce the amount of waste on the that ends up in landfill. And obviously so much of that is about reducing the contamination of different waste streams. So things like disclosing substances of concern that can impact those waste streams, that's really important, so that product, when it's end of life, can be sorted correctly and can be disposed of correctly in the most environmentally friendly way. The rollout actually extends beyond 2030. This is the initial products that we're going to focus on today will be phased in between now and 2030. But then these working plans that I refer to, they'll be issued every 3 years with a new tranche of products that fall within scope. So the implementation timeline will go into 2030 and beyond. The digital product passports are mandated to use open data standards, so they should be visible by and interoperable with lots of different technology, making sure that all of the different kinds of players within trade and international trade can view that data depending on their credentials. And then it's seen as a game changer for that whole supply management and helping the EU achieve its sustainability targets. Okay, so that's kind of like the high level view. We're going to take a deep dive into some of the more pertinent information. So what I've done here is, I'm not suggesting that you all take a look because you're not sad like me and you're not probably remotely interested in the regulation, but I think sometimes it helps to understand what is the regulation that is forcing these kind of like changes. And with regard to digital product passport and eco design, there's quite a few bits. So fundamentally spearheading this is the European Green Deal, which is the EU's big, hairy, audacious goal to be the first climate neutral continent by 2050. So it was launched by President von der Leyen in 2020 or 2019. And essentially it is apparently meeting the increased demand for that kind of climate action over and above via the young people across the EU. Part of it is to, or the overriding goal is to transform Europe's, well, change the face of Europe basically in terms of its economy, its energy, transport, and industries to help achieve that sustainable future. So you might have heard me talk about before about how the EU wants to cut emissions by 50% by 2030 and then rising to 55% beyond that, and then by 90% by 2040. So they're really, really quite ambitious goals. And so there's lots of legislation and frameworks that have been put into place to help them achieve that. One of them is the Circular Economy Action Plan, which was launched in 2020. So that's really one of the main building blocks of the Green Deal. And it includes these initiatives to address the entire life cycle of products. So how products are designed, how waste is prevented, how used resources are kept in the EU economy for as long as possible. And there's a big package of legislative and non-legislative measures that are linked to that. And one of them is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation, which is what digital product passports form part of. The other one is the Circular Economy Act, which is coming into force in 2026. And that aims to make the EU the single market for secondary raw materials, so to increase the supply of those high quality recycled materials and reduce the need for virgin materials in products and in packaging. And again, linked to wanting to be the first, the EU wants to be the world leader in that circular economy by 2030. The circularity rate that it uses to establish how well the EU is doing at the minute is how much material is recycled at the moment, and the EU estimates that their recycling rate at the minute is about 12%, and the goal is to double that by 2030. The other one that is in play, and you might be familiar with it, anybody who is on the call today that deals with electrical goods, is the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Directive. So that's the old one, the regulation replaces that. That was the EU's framework for setting mandatory requirements on the energy efficiency and environmental performance of products in the market. So if you were to nip into your kitchen right now, if you're working from home, you'll see a label on your washing machine or so on that gives you the ratings of how efficient that product is, working from A being most efficient to G being least efficient. And that is part of the energy labelling framework that is closely aligned to the Eco Design for Sustainable Products Regulation. Or directive, sorry. And then we come to the regulation. So the Eco Design, or ESPR, regulation replaces the old directive, and it's a biggie. Together with the packaging and packaging waste waste regulation, PPWR. We've got some, I think we've got some recorded content on some of these regulations on our YouTube channel if anybody needs to play catch up. But this is a biggie. Together with the PPWR, the ESPR, God, we love our acronyms, are two pieces of really heavyweight regulation that will dramatically transform products and packaging placed on the EU marketplace. So the ESPR aims to build on the old directive, which it sees as being really successful in terms of hitting its objectives, to have consumers choose more sustainable products and so on and so forth. And it's going to expand the scope of products that are subject to that eco design beyond those electrical goods. So once fully implemented, it will cover the environmental footprint of all products placed on the EU market. It will facilitate the free movement of only sustainable products in the internal market. So this is a big consideration. Once fully implemented, only products that carry a digital product passport will be able to enter the EU and circulate freely within the EU where they're within scope of ESPR. Obviously, those products that aren't within scope won't be impacted. But customs officials and customs authorities are some of the bodies that will need to have access to these DPPs to make sure that only compliant products are placed on the EU marketplace. And then finally, we've got the working plan, which we're going to dive into. So this is where the EU every 3 years will define the new tranche of products that are going to be included within scope of ESPR and the digital product passports. The first working plan was released this April, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about it. And then we've got delegated acts. Those of you that have been on some of these webinars before will be very familiar with what delegated acts are. I like to call them kind of like implementation guides fundamentally. So they're binding rules that are adopted by the Commission under the authority of the Parliament and the Council. And it's really they're supplementary to the original regulation, but they provide further clarity on how that regulation is to be implemented. So we're expecting quite a few throughout the course of the next 12 to 18 to 24 months that will give us more guidance in terms of how we implement ESPR. So a lot of stuff going on. I would not want to be a commission official these days. Here's the working plan, or part of the initial working plan. So the rationale behind the working plans is that the Commission and its various stakeholders and research groups have chosen priority product categories based on the size of the market, so the number of products that are in circulation in the EU, their sustainability credentials currently, and then the impact that sustainability measures could have on the EU circularity agenda. So as I said before, textiles and apparel doesn't have the best credentials in terms of sustainability. I think over the last few years, there's well, until just recently, I saw statistics of 1 to 2% of global textiles are actually recycled. So textiles was always going to be one of the first ones. Now footwear is not actually, we're waiting for further clarification on footwear. That's subject to a study that's underway at the moment. The EU will always reserve the right to change certain data via delegated acts or change what's within scope of these working plans. So we have to keep on top of this. Footwear, I think, will come into scope before 2029, but we're still waiting on further clarification on that. And then furniture is another one. They've split it by final products and intermediate products. So these are what we call vertical requirements within the working plan. So they affect vertical sectors. So with textiles, furniture, tires, mattresses, they're finished products. But intermediate products are also iron and steel and aluminium. So they will be, there's obviously considerations for manufacturers of finished products using those raw materials. But we're just focusing on the textiles and the furniture and the tyres and so on today. So you can see here that the working plan is split it by the market size, and then the ability for sustainability measures to have a significant impact on the waste of these sectors, if that makes sense. And then they've given an indicative timeline for adoption. Why indicative? Because it can change, it can flex. We've seen of late a couple of pieces of EU regulation be pushed back. The EU deforestation regulation being one of them, because there's been pushback from the member states just saying, you know, they're not quite ready, and so on. The EU has had to adjust its implementation timeline. So all of these dates at the moment are very much kind of penciled in until we get further clarification. And then we've got, so you've got the vertical requirements, which are your sector specific, and then you've got the horizontal requirements that will kind of sit across all of those verticals. So you've got that kind of like matrix structure. So we're expecting 2 delegated acts, one around repairability, and that repairability will have a score. So there will be a calculation that manufacturers within those verticals have to use to score the repairability of their products. And this is all about, and some of you might have watched my Right to
Yeah.
Why did I drop
I
off?
just said,
Oh, I'm so sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
Apparently I dropped off there.
sharing.
Wait just 1 second. Let me reshare my slides. So sorry about that, everyone. Please let me know when you can see that. Jamie, can you see that?
Just yet.
I should say I am 250 meters up a Welsh mountain, so it's quite likely. I am sharing, so everybody should be able to see it.
Okay. Everyone's saying they can see it.
Amazing. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. God, this is throwing me. I already get nervous about these webinars. I'm even worse now. Yes, every manufacturer will have, it's backtracking a little bit. Every manufacturer will have a methodology for scoring the repairability of their goods, and then that will be a score that is then on the digital product passport that consumers can access an EU portal to be able to compare goods based on repairability. And obviously that repairability, if you tuned into my Right to Repair webinar a couple of weeks ago, you'll see that the EU is very much forcing this repairability. So it is introducing a directive that will make sure that consumers always have the right to repair a product even beyond a warranty period. Now, at the moment, that applies to kind of like electrical goods and so on, but eventually it will apply to textiles and furniture and so on. The other delegated act is around the recycled content. So again, any of you that have tuned into some previous webinars, you'll see that recyclability is all around that material separability and the preventing the presence of those hazardous substances and ensuring high recyclability rates. So with textiles, for example, it would push manufacturers to use more mono materials and to prevent the use of certain nasties within dyes and so on, which I'm sure most of us are doing anyway. But it's about being able to demonstrate that that's happening further up the supply chain, so as not to damage your score. Digital product passports, again, are not sector specific because they're a horizontal obligation. So they're going to cover almost all physical goods placed on the EU marketplace. Okay, so that's the working plan. Again, it's a document that you can access. It's just the working plan 2025-2030, and it provides all that information in there. So what are in the DPP components? Well, I suppose, first of all, what's the purpose? So essentially, like I said with the overview, to have you as manufacturers use what the EU refers to as your R strategies, and I've listed these in the right-hand column, to enable a more circular economy, so boosting material and energy efficiency and extending product lifetimes, and then obviously optimizing product use, which within the textiles area is really, really important. And to ensure that improved access to data within the digital product passport, there may still be, I hate this because I've been hoping that digital product passports will eradicate the need for product labeling. It doesn't look like that's going to happen. There may still be some products that, in addition to having a QR code or a RFID or something on the product, may still have to have a certain amount of labeling with it as well. But the digital product passport should reduce the amount of data that go on our labels. So making sure that, you know, consumers can compare products and access repair and so on. Really important, because those of you that have been on the GPSR journey with us, you know, when we're putting so much information on labels and so on, or on documentation or packaging, we know that consumers traditionally, me being the worst case, the worst one, I'll throw away packaging and I'll throw away documentation. But if there's an indelible, you know, QR code or something on the product, I always have access to those repair informations, to those disposal information, to that composition, and so on and so forth. They'll also act as a compliance standard. So much of the safety information that has been required under GPSR or under a harmonized regulation, you know, that regulation that needs the application of the CE mark, that will be, basically everything will be in the passport. So depending on who needs access and what credentials they've got, so a consumer will see one view, customs might see another view, depending on what they need to see, and then market surveillance authorities will see other data depending on what they need to see. So all of that lovely EU declarations of conformity, all that lovely stuff we've had to do around product safety, all of those user manuals and so on, they can all be accessed via the digital product passport, which is really quite revolutionary for us. Going through some of the data that's going to be required. So obviously the sustainability performance data. So that will be just in the form of probably a score, which will be initially on that recycled content and that repairability. They're the two first ones. So you'll have that. Then you'll have a unique product identifier. Again, we don't know whether that's going to be at the item, batch, or module level, but as soon as we know, you will know. Then, because we're linking with, we will eventually be linking with customs authorities via these, and there'll be commodity code or tariff code or HS code, depending on what definition you use. There'll be compliance documentation, like I say, so all of your declarations of conformity, all of your GPSR information will be on there or accessible on there via the for the market surveillance authorities. Any instructions, manuals, safety information that the consumer needs to see will be on there. Your full details of the manufacturer will be on there as well. Economic operator details. So if you've got certain distributors or a particular importer that you're using in the EU, that can be placed on there. Facility details will be, say, your manufacturing address, or you know, where the product originates from in terms of, or where the product needs to be referred to. And those facility details will be given a kind of identifier rather than an address and a trading name. It will be a unique identifier for that facility. For our colleagues in the EU, obviously you don't require a responsible person or an authorised representative, but for those of us in GB who do need that, then your authorised representative details will be in the digital product passport as well. And then the digital product passport, you can, as the manufacturer, you can create that yourself. But there must be a copy stored with a digital product passport service provider as well, a backup copy. Or in the case with Global Trade Department, because we deal with a lot of micro businesses and small businesses, we're going to take the lead on creating the digital product passport to help them, and we'll basically share that copy. So we just won't be holding a backup, we'll be integral to actually helping our clients build that product passport. But our details for our clients, for example, would be in that digital product passport as well. Okay. Implementation considerations. So I think that the fact that it's such a huge piece of regulation and it applies to such a broad category of products, it's quite a heavyweight piece of regulation to implement. It's going to digital product passports are going to have to be on every product outside of food and feed, medicines, the usual suspects that sit outside of this kind of regulation. I think the other one is making sure that there's full EU regulatory alignment. So, those of you on the call today will probably be already complying with GPSR, or maybe you're complying with the Low Voltage Directive, a piece of harmonised regulation. You're complying with market surveillance regulation. It's making sure that everything kind of sits together nicely within the digital product passport. Again, that's not your role to do that. This is very much for the EU Commission to set out how it's going to ensure that. Then I think the data gathering for DPPs, and this is on us as manufacturers, and obviously you guys with the likes of us helping you, collecting that kind of data on materials and origin, repair history, carbon footprint, and so on, that takes time. So the sooner we can get ahead of that, then the more ready we are for the implementation of DPPs. But I think also we're at the mercy of the EU, and their system has been ready. So, there's a requirement to issue these unique operator identifiers and unique facility identifiers that I talked about. So we need to understand who's going to be issuing them and what the guidelines are for those organisations that are issuing them. There has to be the DPP registry has to be ready, because that is where, when you have a digital product passport applied to your product, then you will log that with the digital product passport registry. That's anticipated to be up and running by July next year, but these things are, all quite likely to slip. There's also the web portal. This is where consumers will be able to log in and retrieve the digital product passports for certain products and compare them for their sustainability credentials and so on. That needs to be up and running. And then I think the biggest one for me, because we sit on the we see not just the regulatory side of stuff, but we also focus on customs as a business as well, is the single window certificates exchange system. So this is the biggie on the customs side of things, that will basically see digital product passports as being a major part of clearance for import into the EU. So I suppose for our EU colleagues on the call today, it's not such a massive issue unless you're importing from overseas, and obviously your suppliers need to be compliant, otherwise you can't get your goods. But for you guys kind of selling goods internally within the market, it's not such a consideration, that customs element. But having that customs element up and running is going to be integral for GB businesses being able to, it will be a kind of cut-off point. Once that's up and running, unless we have digital product passports on our products, we won't be able to physically get them into the EU. There's also the data standardization. So, your suppliers are going to have to provide you with certain information around composition, and carbon footprint and so on. If you've got upstream manufacturers or suppliers, you're going to need to obtain that data from them. The delegated acts that we get in time will help enormously, because they'll help us focus on, okay, what is it exactly that we need from our manufacturers? And then the access control and disclosure strategy is a big one. Again, this is for the EU to determine how we're meant to implement this, but it basically will see us providing different data depending on the role of the person accessing that data. So the actual regulation lists a whole host of people that need access to this data. It could be customs, it could be market surveillance authorities, it could be importers, distributors, and so on. What do they need to see? And then interoperability and verification of DPPs. So, you know, whether the digital product passport is accessed via a QR code, which is, I think, probably what Global Trade Department are going to use, or an RFID or a 2D barcode, whatever it is, it's making sure that that data carrier is compatible with other systems that other players or actors might be using. So, like I said, the regulation actually states that the digital product passport has to be fully interoperable with other digital product passports and data provided free of charge and easy to access for customers, manufacturers, importers, distributors, refurbishers, manufacturers, remanufacturers, recyclers. The list, basically everybody needs to have access to that. So it needs to be interoperable and easily verified. Supply chain involvement and complexity. So GPSR has taught us that there is not enough traceability in GB supply chains. It has caused some of our clients a lot of pain to get the required safety information from their suppliers. It's not just safety now, it's around sustainability as well. So where you have upstream suppliers or upstream manufacturers, we can't start early enough to get that kind of information so that we're ready for that DPP implementation. Sustainability claims, this is quite a big one as well. It's part of the regulation. So taking care not to greenwash. So you know what greenwash is, when a company makes misleading claims about how environmentally friendly they are, or you know, how they're reducing their environmental impact, but they're actually not. It could be false labels, or, you know, using terms like eco-friendly or, you know, fully sustainable, and actually they're not. Now, the EU's ahead of this already because they've got regulation coming in. The EU Green Claims Directive is under consideration at the moment. It's at the proposal stage, which will clearly outline you know, what we're able to say on our products with regard to sustainability. I think we're doing a webinar in early January about that, or January or February about that. And then full product traceability. So, you know, being able to track that product's entire journey across the entire supply chain, from raw materials through to design, production, distribution, and then final delivery, so that every actor and every step is documented, identified, and verified. So with fashion, digital product passports are going to need to show, you know, fabric origin, dyeing processes, and when importing from overseas, you know, what the label conditions and so on are of the manufacturers of that fabric. And then, you know, the impacts of non-compliance. So obviously, I never like to focus on this because it's really kind of really alarmist and it gets us all panicking. I'm just thinking practically about things. Sometimes when a product is non-compliant, we're trying to export it to the EU. Sometimes the worst that can happen is the goods are returned, which has a cost, and you end up with an unhappy customer in the EU. That's not what we want. So I think, you know, it can trigger kind of, you know, returns or recalls. There's obviously reputational damage that's linked to that. And then I think importantly, when we see this balloon into the whole customs clearance kind of thing, then there's the inability to clear goods in the EU if we're not compliant with this. Now then, I wanted to do a deep dive into fashion and textiles. So bear with me, those on the call today that aren't in that sector, but perhaps think about what I'm saying and how that applies to your particular products or product categories. So what are the implications for fashion and textiles? So if you're thinking about the sustainability considerations in terms of the materials within fashion and textiles, so natural fibers, things like organic cotton, linen, hemp, bamboo, they're all examples of sustainable natural fibers, and they often require less water and chemicals during cultivation and processing. So if you're already using those materials, then fantastic. But if you're not, what are the options for you moving towards those materials, which are going to be deemed to be more sustainable longer term, and therefore be easier to get onto the EU market? And then recycled fibers, materials like recycled polyester made from plastic bottles or recycled cotton, they're often considered to be sustainable because they repurpose that waste material. And then regenerated fibers, so lyocell, for instance, is made from wood pulp, and it's considered more sustainable to conventional rayon. And then biodegradable fibers, materials like hemp and certain types of cotton, break down naturally after their lifespan. So it's thinking about, and again, I'd have other people on the call today think about what that kind of sustainability considerations are for the materials that they use in their products. And then thinking about it from a manufacturing perspective. So if we think about reduced water and energy consumption, sustainable manufacturing processes focus on minimizing water and energy use in production. So what opportunities are out there for you to do that? Reduced chemical use, so aim to avoid or reduce the use of harmful chemicals in your dyeing or your finishing or other processes. And then waste reduction, that includes kind of like the durability and the repairability of your products, but also think about the packaging of your products as well. What are the opportunities for you to reduce waste, not only with the garments themselves, but also with the packaging of those garments? And then ethical labor practices as well. So, consider where you're sourcing from overseas or even here in the UK, what safeguards can you obtain to confirm that workers are receiving fair wages, they're working in safe working conditions, and that there's respect for human rights throughout the supply chain. Now, the benefits, obviously, where you are reducing pollution and water usage and carbon emissions, then you're contributing to that environmental protection. Resource conservation, you're helping to conserve that natural resource and reduce reliance on finite resources. And in packaging, you're maybe opting for recycled packaging, so you're reducing your reliance on virgin materials. And then circular economy, so you're supporting the circular economy by promoting reuse and recycling and the creation of that closed loop system. So, especially, I'm going to talk about that in a second in terms of some of the commercial advantages within the textiles and fashion sector as well of adopting eco-design. And then social justice. So, you're contributing to that social justice cause, which is increasingly important to our younger generation, who are certainly more sustainability conscious than maybe some of the older generation are. But it's really important to them that they know that the brands that they're sourcing from take this kind of stuff seriously. So they take fair labour standards and protecting human rights seriously. So it is important. Now, thinking about eco-design requirements. So let's take durability, for example. So durability will have a score, and that's currently under review by the Commission at the moment. But where that comes into play with textiles, so it might be your durability might be scored according to your wash resistance or tear strength, color fastness, that kind of thing. Repairability, that might be looking at your stitching accessibility. So is it easy to repair a garment? Maybe replaceable components or repair instructions that are accessed via the digital product passport, or tool-free repair feasibility, that kind of thing. Recyclability, you'll be looking at, you know, your fiber blend complexity, fastener removal, the ability to kind of take the garment apart for end of life, and then your dye and finish impact. So making sure there's no nasties in there that can pollute those waste streams. And then your recycled content, so textiles, you know, how great a percentage of recycled polyester or fiber blend compatibility and so on. And where you've got this information, what sources or what certification can you get from your sources to back up your statement? Carbon footprint, so that might be scored on, you know, life cycle emissions, so the emissions that the garment has produced throughout its life cycle, renewable energy use used in manufacturing, and transport, even down to transport mode as well. Resource efficiency, again, fiber yield efficiency, water use per kilogram of textile, recycled fiber input, and upgradability and modularity. So think about those replacement elements. This probably sits more with furniture than I think it does with, like, furniture. You might be thinking about component modularity or fastener type or upgrade options. But with textiles, it might be replaceable elements, modular layering, upgrade instructions, and so on. And then I think the final one is substances of concern, and this is quite a biggie. So substances of concern are materials or chemicals that negatively impact product circularity. So they impact reuse and recycling, and they also pose a danger or a risk to health, to human health and the environment. So examples that we always see mentioned are PFAS, which are forever chemicals, but also they can be in the textiles and fashion sector. It can be problematic dyes or coatings in textiles that we have to be mindful of. And they're singled out because, like I say, they hinder that recycling or safe reuse of a garment. They, in the case of those forever plastics, they persist in the environment and bioaccumulate. They obviously create risks for consumers and workers, and they contaminate those waste streams. So fundamentally, they kind of undermine the whole circular economy ambition. They have to be, those substances of concern have to be disclosed in the DPP. So you will have to disclose what those substances of concern are, and obviously those things, you'll be familiar with the safety requirements of them having to comply with REACH and other chemical regulations and so on. Now, the commercial advantages, because I would like to put a positive spin on some of this. There's a requirement. I was reading a really fascinating research article a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that there's a real desire within fashion for authenticity. So having the ability to digitally store a certificate of authenticity is something that that fashion brands or luxury fashion brands can really grasp to demonstrate that their products are genuine. And that certificate of authenticity obviously stays with the product, okay, via the digital product passport. And that's deemed to be something that consumers are actively looking for. They want that certificate of authenticity with so many, you know, copy or similar products on the market. Also, aftercare. It gives you the opportunity to kind of address that that often neglected element of luxury and fashion. So within this research, they were also saying that that respondents had expressed an enthusiasm for learning how they can store and repair their pieces, and also provide further styling advice and so on. So you can really, because it's all housed online and digitally, the amount of information that you can have accessible via the digital product passport is absolutely massive. And obviously, where you have that information, you're increasing your opportunity for touch points, and you're kind of deepening that relationship with your consumer via the DPP. And then the impact on resale. So resale is increasingly mattering to consumers with fashion and high-end fashion particularly. And obviously digital product passports provide that opportunity to bolster that. So this research was showing, I have to check the facts here, so just 24% of customers at the moment are opting for purchases through second-hand channels. But 56% of them expressed that their inclination would increase if they were accompanied by a digital product passport with a certificate of authenticity. So this is a gain for the consumer because they can resell their garments, and those garments become more attractive because they have a certificate of authenticity, indelibly linked to the product itself. And obviously, as a brand that's providing that, you become really attractive to that consumer, knowing that they can sell their garments on with a high percentage chance of them selling for a really good price. And yeah, I just found that fascinating anyway. I'm quite happy to share that link with anybody that needs it. So enforcement and timeline. So I've provided basically everything here. So we've got the working plan. That's in place. We know that the delegated acts are going to be introduced between beginning part of next year, right the way through to 2029. The EU always does a midterm review to make sure that everything is working as it should do. We may see other products introduced at that time, so maybe footwear, chemicals, detergents, things like that are currently under review. They may end up being added to the working plan. And then the digital product passports we're going to see gradually rolled out, again starting with textiles from 2027, and I've given the link there. I think the thing to mention is we've got those other sectors, like I say, like footwear, which was planned for 2027, chemicals, paints, detergents. They're all subject to further scrutiny at the minute that might actually make them fall within the working plan. And there's also ICT and electronics, so they kind of fall within this as well. And I don't have the exact date by that, but they will be included in this working plan at some point. So essentially for fashion and textiles, we're looking really at complying from 2027 onwards, which is going back to what I said at the beginning. We have time, so I don't want anybody getting off this call feeling alarmed or worried or stressed about anything. As I said at the beginning, the EU gets a really hard rap for regulation, but it is the gold standard of regulation, and it's globally respected as being the most stringent regulation, and the one that most global markets will look at and either align themselves with or develop similar regulation. So I've just listed here some of the eco-design and circularity regulation that we're seeing across the globe. So if you are complying, if you're choosing the EU to comply with, and obviously our EU colleagues on the call have to, but also I would strongly advise our GB companies on the call today and other international companies that might be joining us to subscribe to the EU. It's still a massively important block for GB companies and also international companies, but also because you're aligning yourself with the most stringent regulation globally, it becomes a lot easier to comply with other regulation across the globe. Normally what happens is with global regulation is that very few markets attack quite such a big piece of regulation as the EU does. They'll choose kind of like different components and introduce it in a kind of like a modular fashion. But if you're exporting to the US, Canada, Japan, so on, then I've given some links to relevant regulation that complying with the eco design and the digital product passport regulation will help you comply with this stuff globally. Considerations. So those of you that are familiar with extended producer responsibility via the Waste Directive, then digital product passports are not part of that regulation, but they will have a bearing. So EPR fees and levies will become eco-modulated over time. So the more sustainable your product and your packaging is, the less you will have to pay in terms of those levies. So because fundamentally you're not putting as much not putting as much product or packaging into waste, so therefore your fees come down. So there is kind of like a link there. I think legal and market access, so obviously GB businesses are going to have to meet ESPR regulation and have the digital product passports to continue selling into the EU, and by default Northern Ireland and also the EEA market, so Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. If we don't comply, then you know we will be blocked eventually. That's not going to happen overnight, but it's something to bear in mind. I think in terms of product design and life cycle management, so digital product passports are actually a really good thing. There's a body of work to do in advance and make sure that we've got all of that supply chain data and that we're on top of everything that needs to go into the passport itself. But I see them personally as being a very positive thing, actually, not only because we're reducing the amount of data that physically needs to go with products, but also because it can provide such a window into our brands, and really those that grasp it and get running with this sooner rather than later are the ones that are going to get that first mover advantage. What else? I think in terms of financial considerations, well, obviously there's the upfront cost if you're requiring any product redesign, and ongoing costs. Obviously there's the maintaining of the digital product passports, updating documentation, and kind of like monitoring those delegated acts. But I think the whole purpose of having this call today is, I think especially with small businesses and micro businesses, the sooner you have awareness of what's coming down the line, the more cost efficiently you can comply and you don't make knee-jerk reactions. So if you have an idea of what your workload is, you can start embarking on that as you run your everyday business, if you like, and you're not rushing at the last minute. Sector specific impacts. Obviously with textiles, it's that traceability of materials and recyclability. With furniture, you're going to be thinking about modularity, and that you can already see with some UK brands how furniture manufacturers have embraced that already. IKEA, I know it's not a UK brand, but it's well respected within the UK. They're already very much in that modularity framework. You know, you can buy additional pieces to add on, you can buy replacement pieces, you can mix and match. It's that kind of direction that furniture is going to need to go more into. And then I think that the commercial benefits of compliance, so you know, first of all, it's going to avoid disruption. So it means that you can continue trading. You're not going to experience any delays or recalls or returned goods, as would be here in GB. Competitive advantage can't be underestimated for those early adopters of this kind of stuff. Brand trust.
So the East Midlands Chamber recommended.
Yes, yeah.
Can you just?
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Let's just try to think about it.
Okay, thank you. Obviously that brand trust, so that having that transparency of data so that consumers can see that you're not hiding behind anything. They can see all of your sustainability credentials, anything that you basically, everything that they need to see to make an informed decision. Risk mitigation, obviously you're preventing incurring any penalties or any product recalls through the product not being compliant on the marketplace. Any reputational damage through non-compliance, and so on and so forth. I'm just very, very conscious of time, so I am gonna move ahead very, very quickly. So planning for compliance, what can we do today from a starting stop? So I think the first thing is to do a kind of product scoping and classification exercise. Identify which products are impacted under ESPR. So textiles, you know, start aligning your garments with, and footwear, potentially preparing for the chance that it might be added with what's referred to, I'm assured, is the product environmental footprint category rules, or PFCR, for apparel. Start aligning those, start gathering environmental impact data. So, you know, a lot of our clients here in the UK have already started to do just very basic scope 1 and scope 2 assessments, you know, as part of their kind of sustainability charter, if you like. So, start mapping your energy consumption, your water usage, your waste generation. And then obviously with textiles, for example, you're looking at that further up the supply chain as well. Conduct a product life cycle assessment. So look at your product's environmental impacts throughout its entire life cycle, from raw material extraction right the way through to disposal. So collect all the data on the inputs, your materials, your energy, and so on, and then your outputs. So what are your emissions? What level of waste are you creating? And then that helps you understand where your biggest environmental impact lies and how to reduce that. Look at existing standards. So whilst we wait for the EU giving us more information, there is the ISO 59020 standard that describes the minimum data requirements for quantifying the circularity of your products. That's a good one to start with while we wait for more information coming down the line from the EU. It's never too soon to engage with your supply chain. So, you need to be talking to your supply chain about more sustainable materials, making sure that they can adhere to eco-design principles, track the origin and the environmental impact of the materials and the components, and seek assurance from your suppliers, along these lines. Invest in that circular design principle, so shifting from a kind of linear take, make, waste model to a circular approach. So consider those, starting to talk to your consumers about recycling, giving them tips for recycling and those information. So with textiles, it might be providing repair instructions or take back programs or recycling info, so on. Be careful to avoid those misleading greenwashing statements. Think about the composition and material that you're using. So try and select those durable, recyclable materials. So materials with low carbon footprint. Try and avoid the virgin materials, both in the product and also in your packaging, and avoid those substances of concern, those nasties, those kind of like chemicals. So with textiles, it might be using more mono materials or easily separable blends, if you like, and design your products for reuse, repair, and fiber recovery. Think about what else? I'm just very, very conscious of time. Think about how you, and I'm conscious some of you might be very small businesses. You might be thinking, well, I wear all the hats here, but where there are some larger businesses, think about engaging your team, having that kind of cross-functional compliance team, so that you can several heads are better than one kind of thing. So you might want to engage legal, product development, sustainability, IT, and so on for the management of those digital product passports, if you're going to lead on that. Training staff on the whole eco-design obligations and how digital product passports work and so on. And again, we're here to provide that kind of training or help with getting that message across. The last slide kind of leads into that. Again, remembering that this was just an introduction to digital product passports and not meant to scare you off or cause you any alarm or anything like that. We're here to help. So opt in to our contact@globaltradedepartment.com. I think we've got a number of existing clients on here, so you're already on our distribution list, but we have EU and global regulation mapped out to 2040 and a little bit beyond now. And we just need to get it out to you so that you're aware of it and you can act upon it. And it means that compliance is so much easier, so much more cost efficient for you. So opt in. Alternatively, I'm guessing there's going to be lots of questions as you digest some of what I've talked about today. You can always reach out to us for a free 15-minute chat. We can cover a lot in that time. We can only cover what we know at the minute and what the EU has disclosed, but we can certainly, help in terms of what we know. And then finally, all of our current webinar activity that's planned for 2025 and 26 is available on our homepage, and there are recordings of previous sessions on our YouTube channel as well. Just do a search for Global Trade Department. And that's really it. I'll probably leave the contact details up for a minute, but I'll go to questions if that's